She wasn't a model, she wasn't an actress, just a mother, worn down by hunger and fading hope. Today, you'll see the faces of the Great Depression, not in textbooks, but alive. I enhanced old photographs, colorized them, brought them to life, so that history can look us in the eye once again. Because she was just one of millions. Across America, people lost their jobs, their homes, almost everything they had. It all began under President Herbert Hoover, and no one was prepared for how bad it would get. Herbert Hoover was president when the stock market crashed in 1929. He believed the crisis could be overcome through local efforts, not federal aid. While politicians debated recovery, millions of families faced a different reality. These boys had no playgrounds, no school lunches, just silence and waiting. With no help in sight, the homeless built their own towns from scraps and broken wood. People called them Hoovervilles, a bitter name for a desperate time. When the government couldn't feed the people, others stepped in. Charities like the Salvation Army served hot meals. Even Al Capone opened a soup kitchen, in a time when crime fed more people than policy. In 1933, Franklin Delano Roosevelt became president. He promised bold action, a new deal for the American people. But for many, speeches couldn't warm the room or fill a plate. The streets stayed quiet, the hunger stayed, and for millions, the struggle only deepened. In the homes that still had walls, families rationed food and warmth, clinging to whatever they had left. And on the edges of cities, beneath bridges and beside docks, the forgotten tried to sleep through hunger. While the nation struggled, Eleanor Roosevelt stepped beyond the traditional role of First Lady. She traveled to the poorest towns, spoke with mothers, workers, and children, and listened. To many, she was the only voice in Washington who truly saw them. Across the country, women carried the weight of survival. They raised children in poverty, held families together with almost nothing, and rarely asked for help. Their strength wasn't in headlines or speeches. It was quiet, constant, and unseen. In crowded classrooms, children sat shoulder to shoulder, hungry, tired, but still learning, still hoping that one day, life might be different. Many of these images were captured by Dorothea Lange, the woman behind the iconic photograph you saw at the very beginning. She was the one who showed us the migrant mother and this child. Lange didn't just take pictures. She revealed the human cost of the Depression. Some chose to march, shouting for work, for dignity, for a future that had vanished overnight. Others simply waited, day after day, where jobs used to be, and never came back. And for many, when hope ran out, they turned to whatever could numb the pain, even for just one more night. Walker Evans was one of the leading photographers of the Great Depression. Working for the Farm Security Administration, he set out to capture not just poverty, but character, silence, and truth. This portrait of Allie Mae Burroughs became one of his most iconic images, a face etched with strength, weariness, and quiet defiance. Some families lost not just their homes, but the idea of home itself. They packed what they could and lived out of their cars. For millions, the Depression wasn't just about money, it was about dignity. And many, like her, carried the weight of hard years without ever being remembered by name. For farmers, the land was everything, and then it gave them nothing. Years of drought and falling prices left families buried in debt, watching their crops die in dust. They worked harder than ever and earned less than ever. Frances Perkins was the first woman in U.S. history to serve in a presidential cabinet. As Secretary of Labor, she helped shape Social Security and labor protections still in place today. Even in the hardest years, life didn't stop. It just changed. Water didn't come from a faucet, but from barrels and pumps. Strangers talked like neighbors, and neighbors leaned on each other just to get through the day. People found moments of normal in a world that no longer was. Margaret Bourke-White was one of the first female photojournalists. Her striking images captured the industry, struggle, and human cost of the Great Depression. Unemployment didn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it was just a man walking, with nowhere to be. Work at home never stopped. Women scrubbed clothes by hand, often with cold water and little soap. And for sharecroppers, even standing by the road meant waiting, for harvests, for news, for anything to change. Harry Hopkins was one of Franklin Roosevelt's closest advisors, and the man behind many of the New Deal's emergency relief programs. He believed that people didn't want handouts, they wanted jobs. Programs like the Civilian Conservation Corps gave them exactly that. For many, survival meant standing in line, not for work, but for a bowl of soup. Others packed up their lives and walked the open roads, chasing rumors of jobs in the hope of something better. John Steinbeck gave the Great Depression a voice. His novel The Grapes of Wrath told the story of displaced families chasing survival across America. These are miners at the American Radiator Mine, men who worked deep underground, often for pennies a day. Dangerous, exhausting, and invisible work that kept others warm above. Before every meal, no matter how small, many families paused to pray. Gratitude wasn't about having enough, but about having anything at all. And for children, a warm plate often came from charity, not home. Woody Guthrie sang the stories of the forgotten. With his guitar, he gave voice to workers, migrants, and the hungry, one verse at a time. Even in a time of scarcity, people held on to what they could. In schoolrooms across the country, children still gathered to sing, their voices soft but certain. Main Street parades continued, not to celebrate wealth, but to remind each other they still belonged. And in places like Salinas, families stood still in the middle of survival, between laundry lines, quiet chores, and the long wait for better days. This is Nettie Featherston, photographed in Texas in 1938. Her face, like so many others, tells a quiet story of strength, poverty, and perseverance. In cities like Lincoln, men lingered on street corners, not just to pass time, but to hold on to a rhythm of routine. In California, even the poorest camps needed someone to keep order, to draw a fragile line between chaos and care. And far from the mainland, in places like Puerto Rico, children worked too, hands stringing tobacco instead of turning pages. Federal camps like this offered a cot, a meal, and not much else. For many, survival meant relying on homegrown food, stored, shared, and stretched through the seasons. In 1932, a farmer sat with his head in his hands, not because the work was too hard, but because even hard work no longer paid. In California, a pregnant woman lived in a makeshift camp with nothing secure but the life growing inside her. And in West Texas, Dust Bowl farmers stood quietly in town, men worn down by wind, debt, and years without rain. Not every story from the Great Depression was written down. Most were lived quietly, in backyards, soup lines, roadside camps, and one-room schools. You won't find their names in history books, but they were there, tired, brave, and moving forward one day at a time. They didn't ask to be remembered, but still, here they are, in these photographs,